So I'm starting the recording. I'm also sharing the screen via WebEx if you want to follow along that way. So where I am right now, where I've made it to on my shot, is offsetting. I've already done, I have a video today where I go through the rest of the polish, or the rest of the splining and the offsetting of the characters. What I have not done is sort of a last really tight cleanup pass. So there's still some contact issues where I want to get what feels like the character, like body parts contacting the ground, pushing off of the ground a little more precisely. I've not made any overlapping action in the hands or in the fingers at least. I've not tracked all of my arcs and sort of made those better. So all of this bottom section here where it says polish, that's what I still need to go through. I would estimate that I have probably about another hour's worth of work on mine. But let's see where I started off at from the last class. So where I was before class got started, or where I was by the end of last class, was this video. Actually, Zane made a point. He said that sometimes the videos, if you're rewatching them, they're lagging a little bit. Is it that you're not seeing the video updating? Is that what's happening? Or?
Pretty much anything you're doing at Maya would be sure lag. You can see nothing, and all of a sudden everything happened in a second. So.
Okay. Well, that's annoying. That's weird too, because these machines should be able to handle this. I wonder if it's the D2L part or the WebEx part doing that. So if this video is not being very clear, sorry. Hopefully it's still helpful in some way. So what you're seeing here is where I left off last class period. I had splined the hips. I had done a sort of basic blocking or a basic pass on the feet to make sure all the contact on that looked correct, and and I had splined all the way up to the top of the head. So this was where I was at, and the cool thing about it is I stepped away from it for a day. Like that means when I came back to it, I noticed new things, and so that's what my first video is here, is me fixing those new things. So some of the things I've talked about is I felt like the character was kind of coming onto screen just a little slow and incorrectly. So I kind of changed the way she comes onto screen, make it a little faster. Basically, I just changed her spacing there. So the frames of spacing off screen were bigger, and it makes her feel like she sort of pops on screen a little faster. And that's kind of what you're seeing me do there, is once I made those changes, it messed some stuff up. So I'm just fixing tons of little things, like the way she's leaning in through that run, and a handful of other little things. So one of the things that I was noticing is there's a weird bobble in her hips as she rotates. Okay. When we were talking at last class period, I was talking about the way Maya generates those curves and how we have to use the Euler filter to kind of fix that, right? And I said, I could lay down on my back, roll over my stomach, and stand up again. And usually the Euler filter realizes that's the wrong way of doing it. I should just rotate it in one axis. One of the ways that Maya understands what is the right way of doing it is by having a rotation order. How many of you have taken technical direction or are currently in technical direction? Okay. So eventually you'll hear about this in that class. Rotation order is this element of it's the element of an object in Maya that allows Maya to generate this curve when you rotate it. And it's basically telling Maya, this is the angle I will probably be rotating this object the most, right? But I'm having this character do some pretty crazy stuff. Like she runs in one direction, she turns all the way around, and then does a front flip, right? And then eventually all of that stuff starts, like, Maya's like, well, you just rotated it in every direction. Which one is the primary direction? And I'm like, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so Maya doesn't necessarily know how to generate that curve correctly, and the Euler filter is not fixing this little bobble that I was getting in the hips, right here you'll notice as she runs up the trees, once she gets to the top here, there's a little bobble in the way her hips rotate, and you'll see it right there. Like it kind of dips a little too far forward and then pops back up. So what's really happening here is because I've rotated it in so many different ways, Maya doesn't know which one's the right one, and it's generating like these, so like it's kind of hard to explain, but like it's generating so much rotation on this that eventually multiple axes end up lining up with each other, right? So think of it this way, if this is my y-axis pointing straight up, right, and this is my x-axis pointing this way, and I rotate my object 90 degrees, those two axes line up, right? But now I don't have a y-axis. Now I just have two x-axes. Whenever that happens in an animation, we call it gimbal lock. And just by saying that out loud, somewhere an animator just shivered, right? It's like, ugh. If I say it 3 more times, I die tonight. So it's a terrible curse of gimbal lock, right? Gimbal. So, now it's a challenge. So, GL, anyway, you have to watch out for it. It's something that all animators kind of fear because it means that now you don't have control of one of those axes. You can still rotate it in the viewport, but in the, I'm going to get dangerously close to it, in the gimbal order of rotation, those things are not lined up correctly. So I can edit in the graph editor all day long. I'm never going to be able to get the right arc out of that. There are some rigs that you've probably used that have like tons of controls. And the issue with all of those controls is some of them are in there because they expect you may end up getting gimbal locked and you'll just need an additional control for this. So you'll have like 2 sets of hips, right? And you're like, oh, hips gotten gimbal locked, can't use that anymore, have to start animating on this one, right? It is a limitation of the technology. Crap, I just said gimbal lock.
Yes, you did.
Oh man, I was enjoying my life too.
Don't die on this track.
Yeah.
No.
Anyway, like you all are going to be freaked out for the rest of your life if actually something happens to me tonight. You're going to be like, I give up animation. Anyway, yeah, you won't forget it.
We'll just forget what that word is.
Exactly. So we are going to. Anyway, this is just something you have to watch out for. But that's what my hips were getting in that rotation at the top of that tree. And so my solution was that little bobble I was getting because of the gimbal issues. I just keyframed through it. I just added more keyframes, right? Until I just, like there's a little stretch through there where I just key every frame to get the correct rotation at the top. And you can see that I'm just adding more and more keyframes to rotate it the right way. So that's what's happening in this video. After I did that, one of the other issues I had with it is I just wasn't happy with the timing. I'll be honest with you, the last video I'm going to show you, I'm not 100% happy with the timing there either. I think I need to do one more like tight timing pass before I go into that polish phase, but I'm okay with it. But one of the things I wanted to do was just spend some time retiming this shot and getting something completely different. Or not something completely different, but getting more of a controlled timing. So I used the retiming tool like we talked about last period. Inserting points, and what I'm doing is I'm scrubbing through and finding spots that I feel like need to be sped up or slowed down, and I'm either increasing or decreasing the distance between that range, right? So I'm slowing certain areas down as she runs up the tree, and that's to kind of give her a settle at the top of that tree. I feel right now she kind of gets to the top of the tree and immediately flips, right? I wanted to give her like a little bit of a breathing moment there before she does the flip. And then I wanted the flip push off to be a little faster and I wanted the landing to be a little faster, but I wanted her to have a similar hang time, right? I want you to kind of get that, be able to read her time in the air, right? But I wanted her to hit the ground kind of hard, and I wanted her like squash at the end of that to be a little slower too. Now I did all sorts of shifting in here, and then the next thing I do is I snap those keyframes, right? When I started, I was at 100 frames, right? What do you think I was at when I was done? 150. That's what I thought it might be too. It was 108. It was I edited this thing for probably 15, well, probably more like 10 minutes to get the right timing. And the difference in the right timing and the wrong timing was 8 frames for this whole shot, right? It's really subtle changes. It's not like these world-changing like differences. Because timing is just really important. Like the difference in an action reading correctly or not may literally just be 1 frame. Right? And so that was really what I was trying to do, was improve the timing. I still think after I polished it all out, it got just a little sluggish as she's running up the tree. And I'll probably do another retiming pass on that. However, by doing the retiming pass, I broke some stuff. It wasn't a lot of stuff, but it was a few little things. So I just spent a few minutes going through the curves again and kind of making some subtle tweaks that may have been messed up by the retiming. I'm not sure that all of these changes I'm making are actually messed up by the retiming. It's more like little things that I'm now noticing because of the new timing. If you have a lot of broken tangents, like you intentionally broke some tangents to get a sharper impact, it's usually stuff like that that the retiming tool will mess up. But there'll be occasional little things that'll feel a little off. And usually that's because you scaled it a little bit, right? And then you snapped those frames, and Maya had to decide which way to shift that frame, and it shifted it in the wrong direction for what you wanted. Like it shifted it a little too close or a little too far away. And so I had to do another little timing pass on here, or another little polish pass on here just to fix some of that. In the process of doing it, I noticed like a broken, like the leg got a little bit of an IK pop on there. So I also did a little bit of fixing on that. So this is just random little things that broke. So from there, I started splining the arms. I'll be honest, in terms of splining, this is the part that kind of like, this is where I have to like give myself those little rewards to keep me going. Because splining the arms is kind of boring to me. Like, unless your character is doing a very specific arm gesture, like usually I got most of what I wanted in there in the keyframes. What I'm doing when I'm splining the arms is I'm going through and seeing if I can use the curves to amplify the motion, to make it a little bit more clear, right? So it's usually not something that's broken in there. Usually it's just something I need to make read a little clearer. Again, I'm kind of going back and forth in here. One of the things you'll notice is at the top of the tree, she pulls her arms back and then she flips them forward. And there's one frame there, just one frame where both of her arms go through her head and then out, right? And if I started editing that curve, like I'm editing tons of curves just to get one keyframe to work, and my answer to that was, no, I'm just gonna add another keyframe. Like I'm just gonna go ahead and put those arms where I see where they're inside of her head there. I just decided to repose them. And while I was reposing them, I went ahead and put the hands in a much more appealing pose, right? So this is something I've noticed talking to a few people, particularly people who are repeating the class as character animation 2, right? And that's that one of the things you can do to increase some of the appeal in the hands is on your breakdowns, like your character moves their hand from like pose A to pose B. If you put an interesting hand breakdown in there, even if pose A and pose B, the hand are exactly the same, that breakdown will make the hand feel loose, right? It'll loosen up that hand animation. And so that's kind of what I was doing too, is trying to find some spots to put that in there. Some of the things that you'll see me doing is trying to make it look like as she's pulling her arms back here, I tried to make it look like it's dragging her wrists, and then I tried to add just a little bit of overshoot on the fists at the end of that to get that like pop at the end, right? So again, like the noticeable difference on the arms is not huge, but it's still pretty important to go through and just kind of clean those up. Where I'll actually start seeing problems in the arms are when I track the arcs. And the arms are making these big sweeping gestures. I'll find little inconsistencies or little bitty places that I can push those arcs that will make it better. Again, one of the things I'm doing a lot in this is I'm play blasting every time I make some major changes, just because what I'm seeing in my viewport is not going to be very accurate. So after splining everything, making those timing changes, this is what I have. So it's a little punchier now, I think, on the way she jumps back, on the landing. So a little bit more weight. There's still a couple of little things that I was noticing on the way she runs up the tree, and in fact, she's like hitting the ground very hard. There's a couple of little things, but I just wanted to give you sort of a baseline. This is what it looks like after I've combed through all of the major curves, right? All the spine and head, all of the arms and hand. Not really the fingers yet. That's kind of something I just do in polish because the finger curves are going to drastically be changed by the arcs of the arms. So, and overall, I'm feeling like this is okay. Like I'm not. It's not finished yet, but it's feeling better. Now, the thing that I am noticing though is it really still feels kind of tight to me in the overlapping action department. It still kind of feels like everything is kind of hitting at the same time, especially that thing she does at the end. It's got a nice overshoot, but everything overshoots together. And I just feel like I needed to make one more push through this to get some overlapping action in it, right? But before I do, I did one more pass to try to fix some of that weight, right? So the way the feet are hitting the ground felt a little soft to me in a few spots. How deep she sank into each of those steps felt a little soft. So I did one more pass on cleaning that up. Now this is interesting because the passes that I do that took the longest, like if you look at the length of time each of these take, the two longest were, at least of this batch that we're looking at today, the two that took the longest was splining the arms and this pass right here, which is me just going through and trying to figure out what was wrong and trying to make it better, right? Just this part right here, like see how like her foot felt like it was kind of easing into the ground. I was not happy with that. I wanted it to feel like it slapped the ground. And it took me just a little bit of time of messing with that to make it work right. I tried playing with the spacing here on that foot, but it didn't really work, so I had to do a different method. Here I'm sort of breaking some tangents to make sure stuff hits a little harder. So a lot of this was really just going through and trying to get the contact of the feet and the sort of up and down of the hips, how those correspond together, to feel just a little bit heavier, a little bit weightier. I wasn't really able to read it clearly enough, so I went ahead and flipped it so I could watch it backwards, and was able to spot a couple of other little things that I was able to tweak. So to me, it's still feeling kind of weird that it's like the way she slows down and goes up the tree, right? That's a complex little piece of physics there. She is both having to slow down so she doesn't slam into the tree, but she has to keep enough energy moving that she can make it up the tree. And I know we make you take physics. I'm not expecting you to break out like a calculator and start trying to figure that out. It's more like I have to be thinking of all of those different forces involved. She is slowing herself down in her forward progression because she's using her feet against the tree. But at the same time, she has to feel like she hits that stride at the exact right speed, or it's not going to feel right. So that was sort of my struggles with this. This one was actually a pretty long video. I think it was like 12 or 13 minutes I was working on just that part. So after fixing that, these are some of the changes that it made to it. So they're really subtle changes again, but hopefully now it's feeling just a little bit weightier in the way she is taking those last few steps before she gets to the tree, and that little like surge thing she does at the end. Okay, here's where I mess up the animation. So after all of that tedious polish of every curve, I'm like, I'm just going to start shifting them around and see what happens. Like, it's very destructive. And so I save beforehand, but the offsetting pass, like we looked at here, I offset the root translation keys to happen one frame before the rotation. I'll be honest, I didn't do that here. I need to try that and see if I get, I don't know if I would do it with a translate Z, but I probably will do it a little bit with a translate X and Y. Just to see if that loosens it up just a touch. What might actually work better for me, just thinking about this, is instead of offsetting the translates earlier, offset the rotates later. So basically just play around that to see if that works. Offset the spine and head controls to show lead and follow. Well, she has this enormous head, and when she's doing a flip, that breaks some stuff. Offset down the arms to reduce, or to show some lead and follow, and then offset each arm to reduce twinning and overlapping action. So, so that's this next part that I do here on offsetting. And so you'll see that I just select down the spine, and the first thing I try is like, can I just offset the spine and head 1 second later, or 1 frame later from the hips, and then just the head 1 frame later than the spine, right? So it's sort of like the pendulum down her spine. And I don't know if you saw what was happening, but it was really breaking her neck. Like, nope, I just tried to hit stop in the Maya keyboard. Let's see if I can find it here. As she flips, like her head is really just breaking, right? And I'm like, okay, so that's not going to work. I could try changing a few keyframes there, but instead I realized that I think that the character kind of tightens up in the flip. I don't think that they're all like flying through the air loosey-goosey. So I decided to not do any offsetting during the flip. And instead, I did something different. I offset the chest in all of the animation. So the chest is happening 1 frame later than the hips throughout the entire animation. However, the head is happening 1 frame later throughout the run part of the animation at the beginning, but it's happening 1 frame or maybe even 2 frames earlier after the landing. And the reason for that is because then it feels like she's leading with her forehead coming up, right, as she pops up, and then this little like head bob thing she does, it feels like she's like somebody's holding her back, right? Like I wanted it to feel like she's really like energetic to start lunging forward. So you can kind of see, I've gone way past that point now. After I did the head, I started working on the arms. Again, sort of offsetting down the arms. When I tried offsetting everything by 1 frame, it was just way too loose on some of the flip stuff, and again, that needed to be very precise. So again, I offset the elbows and the wrists 1 frame each as the character is running, and at the end when the character kind of pops back up to that impact, right? Again, I wanted to feel like her head is leading that action. The other thing I do, and the last little thing I do here at the very end, is I offset each of her arms, right, to feel like they're happening at a slightly different time, right? Particularly in this last little piece here, where she kind of does this thing. Now, by offsetting that, that's going to screw up a couple of my silhouettes in some key poses, and so I go through and make sure that I didn't really butcher that too bad. And fix anything. One of the things it did do is it made her fists a little too loose on that last thing that she does with her arms where she slings them down. And so I took a little bit of time and corrected some of those poses as far as what you're seeing happening right here. So. All right. So this was at 10:54. And I still hadn't created the time lapses for these. So I quickly did that and play blasted where I was just a few minutes ago. So this is where it is right now on my computer. Again, I still see a little bit of timing issues, particularly as she goes into that last step on the ground, right there. Like to me, that feels just a touch off. And I think it's one of two things. It either slows down just a touch too much and needs to still kind of have some of that forward energy, or she's not sinking deeply enough into that squat. Did you have something to solve that you're thinking it was?
I felt like it was going too slow on the back step because in the reference, it's like he's almost landing, hopping back, and then sinking.
Oh, so you think that like hop back needs to be much faster? Okay. Okay, I may try that. Let me try speeding that up and see if that.
Or maybe just not having the foot up as much because it's almost like he's skating across the ground.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to push what he's going for just a little more intensely. Like try to push the intensity of it just a little bit, but it may be a touch too big. So I may be able to scale that whole thing down like one frame faster. Alright. So again, the things that are still left for me to do, I still want to track all of the arcs on the fists, on the hands. I want to track all the arcs on the feet since she's doing a flip, right? And I want to make sure that they're actually making some pretty clean arcs. By doing that, this will actually clean this up quite a bit. This will make a big difference in cleaning those arcs. I need to add a lot of little detail stuff. Like she still needs some more face animation, I think. And that's one of the downsides of having a character with a face, is that if everything else is moving except for the face starts to feel dead and boring. And so she needs like a little bit of like maybe a blink somewhere in there, some like shifts in her eyebrows just a little bit. And I think when she, like at the end where she's making that snarl, like I think we need to see her lip move just a little bit from it. I need to offset the fingers. The fingers are so small on your character that sometimes, like, I'll be honest with you, sometimes if you are in a rush, that is where you can kind of fake it a little bit. I'm not in a rush. I want to make sure this is really good. So I want to do another pass just on the finger parts of the hands. I'm okay with where the wrist is hitting. I want little things, like when she makes that like flex at the end, I want to just very subtly squeeze it tighter and then release it, right? And that seems like, dude, you're just like, nobody's ever going to see that, right? But like those are the things again that add up into like that's why there is a difference between the animation you see on a Netflix series and a Pixar movie, right? There is a noticeable difference in production time, production cost, and really just production value, right? Like you can just tell that there is a level of polish on one that is not on the other, even if you can't point to it and say that's exactly what it is. So I want to push this just a little bit more. I would mention one more thing on the offsetting that I did. When she turns around, I tried to lead with her head to where it looks like she gets to the top of the tree and then looks at the ground before she does her flip. One of the other things I'm probably going to do is add just a little bit more head animation to it on top of this. So I kind of push what I'm getting already in here, and I'll do some of that in the graph editor, and I'll do some of that by changing some stuff additionally with key poses. I don't know. Now I'm kind of curious. Other feedback on this? What would you improve?
She kind of, I don't know if you're going for like a cartoony or a piece sort of thing, but she looks like she stalls in the air too long when she flips.
It's like she's hanging in the air too long?
Just a little bit. It doesn't seem like she's going across the park. It seems like she jumps, flips, and then leaves the arc a little bit.
Yeah, I think that there is something right in there. I'm trying to figure out what that is too.
I think there's just enough anticipation of how far she goes. Like she doesn't really get down as far as she should.
So push a little bit more of that anticipation between the
I
flips.
think you need more of that. I think the big question is how far she goes. But she goes significantly farther than he does.
Yeah. And that's another thing I'm considering is how much I want to push the cartooniness of it. So working at this level, recognizing that you can show this to your art director and they'll be like, oh no, she needs to go like 1.5 feet further, right? And that should not ruin your life, right? Like learning to be able to how to take that and adapt it. There's a couple of different techniques I could use. So I'm actually going to challenge myself in that way. I mean, it's not really a challenge, but I'm going to look at it and say, what happens if I made this really more exaggerated on how far she went? That's really going to mess up the art, but I think what's happening right now is the distance isn't as cartoony as the character, right? So she still seems like it's a little further than him. But what would happen if I had her jump like way further? Well, one, she would go off screen. So I have to play around with my camera, maybe move the camera just a little bit during that action. And so that's something that, yeah, it may take me 15, 20 minutes to test that out and see if it looks better or worse. But if it looks better, it's worth 15 minutes, right? If it looks worse, I learned something. So I don't think that that's going to be too much of a waste. I kind of agree that there's something up in the art. But one of the things that maybe, I think there's two things that maybe, is that I think she needs to, in real life, he kind of goes into a ball and kind of stays in that ball for at least a frame, right? She kind of goes into that ball for one frame and then is back out of it again. It's almost like I need to keep her tucked into that ball a little longer and then have her stretch back out a little faster. And then I think what would happen is, it's like her center of gravity is a different spot for every frame in mine, but at least it would stay the same for 2 frames if she was tucked into that ball. Does that make sense? Justin?
So, 2 things on the tree. Whenever she's moving her left foot back, it feels like it's sliding instead of the step that he takes, which would feel a little weird on her part. And whenever she's about to pedal off, I don't feel like there's much going on in her left leg. So that might also change her mark to where it looks like it's marking more. So
Where she's pushing off the tree?
Yeah.
All right.
She's just about to push off. I can see the right knee bend in, but the left knee doesn't seem to do much.
That might work to push. I think it was Eli that said push her down a little bit more, and then it was somebody said. I think that would probably give her that. I see what you're talking about though. That's a good point. Like you see the left foot just feels like it kind of slides up the tree. So I can fix that just by creating a couple of hold poses where it stays in one frame. Like really what's happening is she's hitting one pose and then immediately sort of transitioning to the other. So I need her to hit that one pose and that foot needs to stay in the same place for maybe a frame or 2 and then shift more quickly to that other frame. And then it'll feel like a quick slide and another solid contact. So I think that's a good note. So yeah, so I'm going to try to put these in before next class period. I'm going to try, like this is something I always want to do every semester. I'm going to try to do the project along with you. I can't promise I'm going to do that with all 4 of them. I am going to do it with this one, and I'm going to do some variation of the lip sync with you. The reason for that is how I've always done the lip sync lecture is I just take a kind of boring animation and I show people how to do the face part of that animation. And I realize what I sometimes get are boring animations with facial animation from the students. And I think it's really important to remember that all of this work we're putting into the posing on this character, that goes into every animation you ever do, right? Even if your character is just talking, like you really still need to think of all of the gestures they make, all of the like dynamic poses, and how to make them more dynamic. Even if the character is just sort of standing roughly in one spot, how do you make that appealing and dynamic and fun to watch? And so I'm going to try to work along with that one as well. I will do parts of each of them with you, especially the game cycles. I just can't promise I'll finish a whole piece with you. But I'm going to try to hit the same deadline you're hitting. I recognize that I'm asking you all to do a lot, so I'm kind of testing it to see if this is feasible, considering I'm also like teaching 2 other classes, creating a fully online class, writing like about 300 pages worth of different academic documents. I'm like, I feel like it's equitable. I can get this done. You can get this done. And then like we're kind of working along with it together. This level of environment is completely fine. Pop some lights in there so it doesn't look terrible. A simple render, like I'm not gonna, like the critique and none of that stuff is going to be on like the quality of the render. However, recognize your render is an element of appeal, right? And if I can't see the images, it's not appealing, right? It's part of the clarity of it. What you do with lighting may make this read better, or it may make it read worse. Just another note quickly on the flip part of this. I think there's also a chance that one of the reasons it looks different on mine versus the reference is because the reference has motion blur. And so I'm going to render mine with motion blur too, and there's a good chance that all of that stuff in the air is just going to be like a green, blue, and skin-colored smear, right? And that's okay. Like that's how real cameras look. But it'll also mean that those individual frames won't flash at you as much. And so that is something that costs you a little bit in render time, but usually improves the appeal of the piece. Questions? So I'll put this out here, one quick note on these projects. We're currently in the process of redesigning the website for ETSU. Like in a few weeks, we're going to ECGC. We're always looking for student work to show off, right? And occasionally it's even job related. Occasionally I bump into somebody who's like, hey, you got any like superstar students? We're kind of thinking about hiring somebody. Could you send me a piece? And I'll be like, well, here's a play blast that still has all the controls in it, and it's rendered from 1.5 miles away, but I promise they're a good animator, right? No, if I just have a piece that is finished, like when John asks for some examples to put on the website, I'll be like, put this one on there, it's finished, it's ready to go, right? When a friend of mine from a game studio is like, hey, we're looking for a contract animator for a couple of months, can you recommend a student? I'll be like, what about this person? Is that kind of what you're looking for? But if I don't have any of that stuff, if it's not finished, then really you're just postponing any opportunities that could pop up. The same for you. Like, it recently has come up that like you need to be like prepared that if somebody walked in the door, like Anthony's here today, right? But he's not necessarily wanting to look at your demo reel. But let's say a recent graduate who's working at a studio is in town, decides to swing by for pizza, and comes in to visit us, and is like, hey, what are y'all working on? You need to be prepared to make them remember your name, right? And that's one of the reasons I do require these to be rendered, is because if I don't, it won't be rendered until your portfolio class, right? So that is the little note that I would say on the rendering. I don't grade the rendering. I think there's an element in there for like personality, appeal, and polish or something like that. And that will impact it, because if like the lighting is terrible or there's no lighting at all, then it has no emotion in the scene. But I just wanted to mention, like, don't spend too much time on the modeling, don't spend too much time on all of that stuff, but try to still get a render that looks reasonable enough in terms of appeal. So make sure you kind of budgeted a little bit of time on the end for that. Now I do know that, I don't know if it's in this class, I know that in some of the classes there are people doing 2D animation. Kind of a similar thing goes for you all, but I recognize that rendering for you is more than just hitting the render button. It's like, that's the polish phase. So really, I kind of understand if what you're turning in is like a pencil drawing, like just the line drawings of this. If you get a chance to do any coloring, any shading, anything like that, that's cool. Parker, I think you're probably not. I don't know if anybody else is doing 2D in here. I don't think they are in this class, and there's 3 people in the next class. All right, I'm actually going to go ahead and stop because the rest of this isn't really related to the class.